Have you wondered why the government and your favorite news channels, which are so quick and eager to celebrate the briefest of anniversaries, have kept totally silent about the milestone we have just passed? The so-called achievements of the first 100 days of Modi 2.0 were tom-tommed all over the media, but you'd be hard-pressed to find any talk of what the government has accomplished now that New Kashmir is 100 days old. On August the 5th, Union Home Minister Amit Shah told Parliament his government was scrapping Article 370 and ending not just the autonomy that Jammu and Kashmir has enjoyed as a state of the Indian Union, but also its territorial integrity and its very status as a state. This was supposed to be a historic decision, one that had finally led to the complete integration of Kashmir with India. So how come 100 days later, Amit Shah and Narendra Modi are being uncharacteristically silent about how successful their masterstroke has been? Well, they're silent because, like demonetisation, whose anniversary also came and went without any official celebration, the government's Kashmir decision has been an utter disaster. Of course, for the people of Kashmir, but also for democracy, the constitution, the judiciary, the rule of law, for children, for the media, for the economy, for Indian federalism, for the fight against terror, and also for Indian diplomacy. In this episode of Beyond the Headlines, I will explain in 10 points the disastrous situation the Modi government has created with its decision to scrap Article 370. The story of the past 100 days in Kashmir is not a flattering one for Indian democracy because, quite frankly, and without any sense of exaggeration, there is no democracy or rule of law in Kashmir today. Here are 10 pieces of evidence. First, the government has arrested an indeterminate number of people without formally charging them of any crime or presenting them before a court of law. In doing so, it has not just misused but blatantly violated the law on preventive detention. Some reports put the figure of those arrested at as many as 4,000 people. The list includes 3 former chief ministers and dozens of leaders who have stood for or won elections in the past. Leaders that move the courts for their release are threatened with imprisonment for 2 years under the Public Safety Act. Cases in point: Shah Faisal and Farooq Abdullah. The government has been willing to release some of those detained, but only if they sign a bond in which they commit not to make any comment on the current situation in Kashmir for a whole year. This is an illegal demand, yet the courts have not intervened. Second, the scrapping of Article 370 was accompanied by a communications lockdown by the government in which internet services were banned, mobile telephone services snapped, and even landlines disconnected. After a few weeks, landlines were restored, and now, of course, postpaid mobile telephony is permitted, but not prepaid connections or text messaging. The ban on the internet continues, throttling the lives of millions of people and killing those businesses that depend on the net. Third, a report by the Director General of Police in Kashmir, submitted to the J&K High Court and also the Supreme Court, claims there have been no illegal arrests of minors, but its own data confirms that as many as 79 children have been detained in violation of the law. After strenuous arguments by child rights activists, the Supreme Court finally agreed that the High Court's Juvenile Justice Committee had not applied its mind in forwarding its earlier report claiming that all was well. But sadly, no attempt has been made to punish the police for violating the law by holding children under the PSA and also Section 107 of the Criminal Procedure Code, something explicitly prohibited by statute. Fourth, media organizations and journalists in Kashmir have complained about how the restrictions on communication, not to speak of other forms of disruption and pressure, have adversely affected their ability to do their job. When even news organizations from the rest of India complained about not being able to receive stories and video feed from Kashmir, the government reluctantly opened a so-called Media Facilitation Center in Srinagar. but given the critical ground reports that many web-based news organizations have been carrying, the government has now banned them from using the centre and also placed restrictions on freelance journalists. A petition filed by Kashmir Times editor Anuradha Bhasin on the need for media freedom has sadly not made much headway in the Supreme Court. Worse, the Press Council of India has been unable to send a fact-finding team to assess the conditions of the media in Kashmir even 100 days after the clampdown was imposed. Fifth, the government's contempt for the basic norms of democracy became apparent when it pushed for elections to the block development councils last month, even though this meant the ruling Bharatiya Janata Party was the only organized force in a position to campaign. With the leaders of all the other parties in jail, it does not speak well of the government's mindset that it went ahead with the polls knowing that this was not a level playing field. The only saving grace, of course, is that the BJP ended up being trounced by independents. This was an indirect election, of course, where the electors were punches and sarpanches, but even among them, clearly, disenchantment with the BJP ran high enough that the party ended up snatching defeat from the jaws of victory. Sixth, the government is enforcing an illegal travel ban on Kashmiri influencers, preventing individuals from going abroad for fear that they might say or write something that will paint the official policy in bad light. First, Shah Faisal was prevented from going to Harvard. Then we know the journalist Gohar Gilani was stopped from going to Germany, where he was going to work with Deutsche Welle. A young businessman, Bilal Bhatt, was prevented from attending a UN youth event in Bangkok. This travel ban is set to cover as many as 450 individuals. The government has not made this list public, which means none of the affected persons can contest this illegal ban, and they only realize they're on it when they are stopped at the airport when it's too late. This policy is a violation of the Supreme Court's judgment in the famous Menaka Gandhi case, where it said the right to a passport and thus the right to go abroad was a part of a citizen's right to life and liberty. Yet these rights are being trampled upon. Seventh, the crisis in Kashmir has unfortunately shown the higher judiciary in very poor light. Not only have the Jammu and Kashmir High Court and the Supreme Court been reluctant to take up habeas corpus and human rights cases which are urgent, but the judges have often made dismissive observations that are sharply at variance with the role that the judiciary is meant to play as an independent column of the state. As for the two big constitutional questions, is the reading down of Article 370 legal, and is the scrapping of J&K's status as a state legal, the Supreme Court took its own sweet time to consider the petitions that had been filed. Contrast this with the British Supreme Court, which, on a relatively minor constitutional issue, which was Prime Minister Boris Johnson's attempt to curtail Parliament's session, not only did the British Supreme Court hear the matter with urgency, but they also eventually ruled against the government. It is unfortunate that the apex court in India has allowed October the 31st to come and go. This is the date on which the state of Jammu and Kashmir finally was split into two union territories, without holding a single hearing on the constitutionality of the move. Eighth, even if we set aside the issue of Article 370, the fact that the Modi government also misused Parliament's guardianship of Jammu and Kashmir during a period of President's rule to actually snuff out J&K's statehood is a threat to every other state of the Indian Union. Shockingly, other than the DMK in Tamil Nadu, hardly any other regional party has woken up to the danger this approach holds to their own states should some future government at the centre, or even the current one, decide it has had enough of their regionalism. Ninth, the end of Article 370 was sold as a move that would help finish off terrorism. But judging from the kind of attacks which have taken place since August the 5th, it is quite possible the government has actually made the security situation worse. In the past 3 decades of insurgency, militant groups never systematically targeted migrant workers from elsewhere in India. This is the reason there are as many as 30 or 40,000 workers from Bengal, Bihar and other states who have been living and working in the valley for years. Now, however, After some of them have been targeted and others warned, an exodus has begun. There have also been terrorist attacks on the fruit trade, something which is quite new. In any case, the claim that terrorism was caused by Article 370 is deeply flawed, as the declining graph of terrorist incidents over the past 20 years clearly demonstrates. 10th, the disaster in Kashmir has been a disaster for Indian diplomacy. Never in the past 2 decades has India been subjected to such critical media coverage and political scrutiny from abroad. And never before has the Indian government been so bereft of credible answers. A few weeks ago, National Security Ajit Doval made a desperate attempt to correct the public image of the government's Kashmir policy by flying in right-wing European politicians. But the visit was a flop. By sacrificing whatever moral high ground India has occupied till now in the eyes of the world, the Modi government has actually made the fight against Pakistan-supported terrorism and terrorist groups harder. Simply put, the world today is more willing to give Islamabad a pass because of what Narendra Modi has gone and done, not less. On October the 31st, the Ministry of Home Affairs put out a new map of the erstwhile state of Jammu and Kashmir, now shown as 2 separate union territories. It will take all of us a while to get used to the cartography of New Kashmir and New Ladakh. I spoke at a seminar in Kannur University in Kerala last week, and a professor there noted how this map, like the one which preceded it, naturally includes the territory occupied by Pakistan, even though that territory is administratively not under the control of India. Just like you have a map without territory, you have a democracy without people, he said. 100 days after the creation of New Kashmir, I cannot think of a more fitting epitaph for the old one.